I was shocked and deeply concerned when I learned that the mayor of Istanbul was arrested. The mayor of Istanbul is democratically elected. He needs to be able to serve his community in line with democratic principles and the rule of law. We stand for democracy in Turkey.
Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. Our main focus this week is the struggle for Turkish democracy playing out on the streets of Istanbul. Expect on-the-ground reporting and an interview with Can Dündar, one of Turkey's most renowned journalists in exile. Also on the show, a crisis in French-Algerian relations and the politics of remembrance. Those stories and more coming up on the programme. When a democratically elected leader uses the judiciary to imprison his main political rival, then the trajectory is clear. Unless mass popular dissent can force a change of course, then the country will probably not be a democracy for much longer. That is something that tens of thousands of people in Turkey have understood over the past week as they take to the streets in the largest nationwide protests in over a decade. The catalyst was the arrest and subsequent jailing of Istanbul's mayor, Ekrem İmamoğlu, on corruption and terror charges just days before he was due to be selected as the main opposition candidate. With over 1,400 arrests and aggressive clampdowns on journalists and other members of the press, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is warning that protesters will pay a heavy price for their dissent. From Istanbul, Dorian Jones reports.
In freezing conditions and in the face of a demonstration ban by the Istanbul governor, tens of thousands of people protest outside Istanbul City Hall over the arrest of Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu. Addressing the crowd, Özgür Özel, leader of the main opposition, Republican People's Party, described İmamoğlu's arrest as a coup and called for the people to take to the streets.
Artık sokaklardayız. Meydanlardayız. Korkmaya devam et. Bizi korkutamazsın.
Özel declared, this is not a time for politics in rooms and halls, but on the streets and squares. Most of those heeding his call are the young, who've grown up only knowing President Recep Tayyip Erdogan as the leader of their country. Speaking to them, there's a desire for change and a belief that the future of democracy is at stake. No one wanted to give their names for fear of retaliation.
We have right to vote. We have right to choose whoever we want to rule us. But he is taking that right from us today.
We want democracy. We want the people to choose the elected. And we want the free will to choose who we want without them being imprisoned.
Smaller protests are also being held nightly across Istanbul, while others bang pots and pans in support of İmamoğlu. Similar protests are occurring across the country. İmamoğlu was arrested in a pre-dawn raid on corruption and terror charges just days before his CHP party was due to nominate him as their candidate in presidential elections in 2028. Many opinion polls give İmamoğlu a double-digit lead over Erdogan. İmamoğlu, who defeated Erdogan's AK party 3 times in mayoral elections, can reach beyond his secular political base to religious voters, nationalists and Turkey's large Kurdish constituency. Sezin Öner is a commentator on Turkey's Politikyol news portal. Öner says the prosecution of İmamoğlu is a clear sign of the threat he poses to Erdogan.
İmamoğlu presents a real challenge. If Erdogan could beat him politically with regular rules, he would love that. But he cannot be doing that. Erdogan wants to take him out of the political sphere one way or the other. The government is counting on to the possibility that once İmamoğlu is out of sight, out of mind, so he will just be forgotten and the presidency will have its ways easier.
But for now, the momentum appears to be with the opposition, with protests growing and continuing to spread across the country. İmamoğlu's CHP party went ahead and declared him their presidential candidate in absentia after holding a symbolic nationwide vote which saw 15 million people casting their ballot for the jailed mayor. That's a quarter of the electorate. Students have now launched a nationwide boycott of universities, with opposition leaders warning of a new escalation in their protests. Turkey expert Gönül Tol of the Washington-based Middle East Institute claims Erdogan is taking a big risk.
It could backfire. Erdogan's strategy could backfire on him, and in the past it did. In 2019, when Ekrem İmamoğlu won the municipal elections in Istanbul, Erdogan did not accept the result and call for a rerun. While in the first round, Ekrem İmamoğlu had won by a razor-thin majority. In the second round, people got so angry and frustrated that they handed Ekrem İmamoğlu a bigger win. So this could easily backfire. And now that hundreds of thousands of people are on the streets, this could turn into something much bigger that Erdogan had not expected.
But as is Erdogan's way, rather than stepping back, he's doubling down, insisting the judiciary is independent and no one is above the law. The Turkish president is now warning the protesters will pay a heavy price.
İhanete bulaşanlar, milletin kardeşliğine pusu kuranlar.
Those who are involved in treason and who set up an ambush for the brotherhood of the nation will sooner or later be held accountable to justice. This is not blind hostility or revanchism. It is the reflex of the national will, the requirement of being a state, the condition of the principle of eternity.
Evet müddet ilkesinin şartıdır.
Erdogan is true to his word, with police increasingly carrying out dawn raids on hundreds of protesters' homes and even journalists covering the demonstrations. İlhan Özgel, deputy chairman of the opposition CHP party, says early elections and a new government is the only way out of the judicial and political crisis facing the country.
The government has to restore rule of law in this country. It is damaging the image of the country, it's damaging the economy, it's damaging the social structure of the society. The judicial system is the least trustful institution in Turkey. You can't continue like this. I mean, everything is possible, but the point is that we have to do anything to stop it. We have the power of the people and Erdogan has the power of the state. So we're going to see who's going to defeat whom.
The protests are set to grow, with the opposition warning that the fate of Turkey's democracy is now at stake. Erdogan insists the rule of law must be respected. With the stakes so high for both sides, few people are predicting the outcome of the impasse with any confidence. Dorian Jones, DW, Istanbul.
I'd like to express my gratitude to Dorian here and to all colleagues currently reporting from Turkey. Everything or nothing, all of us or none. Those words are from a poem by the 20th century German writer Bertolt Brecht. Why am I quoting them now? Well, it's because that refrain, everything or nothing, all of us or none, is to be seen quoted again and again on demonstrators' placards on the streets of Istanbul at the moment. Can Dündar, former editor-in-chief of the centre-left Cumhuriyet newspaper, living in exile in Germany since 2016, ended a recent article in Die Zeit newspaper by arguing that those words should be understood as a warning not just to Turkey, but to the wider European family as well. I asked him what he meant.
The message should be for the Democrats of Europe, there is no salvation alone, none or all. And if we lose Turkey in this struggle, if the autocracy wins in Turkey and Erdogan's crackdown would succeed, then there will be others to get the courage to impose anti-democratic rules all over Europe. So the message is very clear. If we are talking about the governments of Europe, they are so busy with security issues. And I wonder if Europe still cares about democratic rules, rule of law, press freedom, separation of powers. They lost their priority, I guess. And their priority is, of course, more security, more defense at the moment. And I'm afraid Europe kind of ready to sacrifice their traditional values for daily concerns. But for people of Europe, it's different, because they know the base of Europe is democratic rule. And if we lose that for security reasons, we would use both security and our freedoms. So that's why I guess we need to address our message to the European people rather than the governments.
Have the European people heard that message? Well, their civic representatives certainly have. Here's an extract from a video initiated by Paris's mayor, Anne Hidalgo, she's the first voice that you'll hear, in which the mayors of cities all across Europe express their solidarity with Ekrem İmamoğlu, the imprisoned mayor of Istanbul.
We stand with Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu. We stand for democracy in Turkey.
In Strasbourg, capital of human rights, we stand with the mayor of Istanbul. We stand for democracy.
From Timișoara, Romania, I stand with Mayor İmamoğlu.
Athens stands with Ekrem İmamoğlu. We stand for democracy in Turkey.
In Oslo, we stand with Mayor İmamoğlu and call for his release from arrest immediately. We stand for democracy in Turkey.
Just some of the European mayors speaking out in solidarity with their counterpart in Istanbul there. Messages which Turkish journalist-in-exile Dündar says have given him a lot of hope.
It's really very powerful and very exciting to see the most important mayors of the most important cities defending democracy in Turkey, defending a colleague in Istanbul. That shows us the importance of the local solidarity. You can see the reaction of local people, municipalities, civil society, trade unions, political parties, youth organizations. So they are more important than the governments, really, in my eyes. When I saw it, I really felt the people's voice. And imagine the mayor of Berlin was planning to come to Turkey and he canceled this visit and said that I won't be going before it was released. So this is the reaction we are expecting from Europe. This is the attitude. This is the solidarity we need at the moment, not the condemnation of the governments, because condemnations, they don't mean anything, really. They don't change anything. But this civil reaction is crucial at this stage.
So solidarity from Europe's mayors there, not just with the mayor of Istanbul, but with Istanbul itself, with the city. That, Can, was your city once.
Imagine Istanbul has a population of 16 million. Such a crowded city, such a chaotic city, and one of the biggest in Europe, and I guess one of the most beautiful ones. And at the same time, in Turkish politics, there's a saying, whoever wins Istanbul wins Turkey in the next elections. And of course, Erdogan knows this slogan. And that's why he was scared, because mayor of Istanbul, İmamoğlu, won the city 3 times. And now it was his turn to win Turkey. And that's the thing Erdogan wants to stop.
You spoke about the political power of Istanbul as a predictor of who's going to win the country, but it's also got this incredible symbolic power because of its position straddling 2 continents. And there's actually a bridge, isn't there, where that sort of becomes absolutely apparent. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about the symbolism of this uprising happening now in Istanbul.
Well, it is really symbolic. When I was living in Istanbul, my house was in the Anatolian part, Asian part of the city, and my office was in the European side. So every morning I was traveling from Asia to Europe, and every evening I was coming back from Europe to Asia. So this is the symbolism. And of course, Erdogan representing the Asian side of Turkey, I believe, while the European side of the people were trying to be a part of the European family. And Erdogan is pushing more to take Turkey to the Asian Islamic society. And this tug of war is very well symbolized in Istanbul's bridge.
You, of course, Jan, are having to, cover this from exile, but you will be very, very concerned for colleagues reporting on the demonstrations in Turkey. What's the current situation for journalists?
Unfortunately, it's getting worse. And after this latest demonstrations, 8 of our colleagues were arrested. They were under custody for days now. And they did nothing but took the pictures of the demonstrations or reported about them. And the governmental authority warned the TV channels not to get live from the streets. And that shows how fearful they are about the people's reaction, and they are trying to censor the public anger not seen in years. That's why it's very difficult to defend the press freedom nowadays and defend the people's right to know what's going on in their own country. They are blocking the streets. They are putting barriers in front of the municipality, and they are censoring media. But still, people are very enthusiastic to attend the demonstrations, and some TV channels are still bravely covering the protests. So, as I told you, it's a tug of war between democracy and autocracy, and I hope in the end the democracy will prevail.
Turkish journalist in exile, Can Dündar there. You can follow Can on X, unless you have a Turkish IP address, in which case you'll get a message saying that his account is not available due to a legal demand. I can confirm that because I checked it out using a VPN. For the latest from Turkey, you can, of course, also download DW's Breaking News app. I'm Kate Laycock in Germany. You're listening to Inside Europe.
The legendary escapologist Harry Houdini was obsessed with the afterlife.
I see a little boy. He is in a happy place.
Join me, Tim Harford, for a Cautionary Tales trilogy on the world's most famous magician and his campaign to ban mediums, a mission that would cost him friends and leave him fearing for his life.
They're going to kill me.
Listen to Cautionary Tales on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
France and Algeria have plunged into what analysts say is their most serious diplomatic crisis since the former colony gained its independence from France over 60 years ago. Algerian independence was won at a notoriously high price. It's thought that Algeria's War of Independence caused the deaths of between 400,000 and 1.5 million Algerians, 25,600 French soldiers and 6,000 Europeans. However, despite continuing resentment towards France because of the brutality with which it enforced its colonial rule, Algeria is an important economic and security partner for France, and the two countries are linked by a treaty that gives Algerians visiting or moving to France certain privileges. Now, though, the French Interior Minister is threatening to end all that. So what's gone wrong? Well, as John Lawrenson reports from Paris, it all began when President Emmanuel Macron gave a speech in which he recognised Morocco's claim to sovereignty over Western Sahara.
Le présent et l'avenir de ce territoire s'inscrivent dans le cadre de la souveraineté marocaine.
Emmanuel Macron addressing the Moroccan parliament last October by recognising Moroccan sovereignty over this land, the size of New Zealand, that Morocco has been occupying since the 1970s. France was doing no more than the United States, Germany and the former colonial power Spain had already done. But Algeria, which backs the independentist Polisario rebels in Western Sahara, saw it as a diplomatic betrayal. A couple of weeks after this speech, the Franco-Algerian writer Boualem Sansal, visiting family in Algeria, disappeared.
Mais où est passé Boualem Sansal? Depuis le samedi 16 novembre, l'auteur franco-algérien n'a plus donné de signe de vie.
A few days later, the Algerian government said he'd been arrested, charged with questioning the territorial integrity of Algeria. In an interview with a publication in France, he had said that France had given Moroccan territory to Algeria in order to curry favour with Algiers as part of the post-colonial settlement. Sansal is still being held by Algeria. The writer, whose latest work is an ode to the glory of the French language, is 75 years old and being treated for cancer. President Macron said his arrest dishonoured Algeria.
Il est détenu de manière totalement arbitraire par les responsables algériens.
He is being detained totally unjustifiably by the Algerian authorities. Algeria, this country we love so much and with which we share so many children and so much history, has begun a process which dishonors it, preventing a man who is seriously ill from getting the treatment he needs. We who love the Algerian people and its history call on its government to free Boualem Sansal.
With no response so far from the Algerian authorities, apart from the request from the public prosecutor in Algiers a few days ago that the judge sentenced Sansal to 10 years in an Algerian jail. Relations were then already at a low ebb when this happened. Police wrestled a man to the ground in the city of Mulhouse. Minutes before, he'd screamed Allahu Akbar in a crowded street and stabbed a number of people, killing one. The killer was, it soon transpired, an Algerian national who'd been served with an expulsion order, but Algeria had blocked his return on 14 separate occasions, about which the French Interior Minister Bruno Retailleau had this to say.
Si l'Algérie avait respecté le droit, nos accords, ses obligations, il n'y aurait pas eu.
If Algeria had abided by the law, our agreements and its obligations, the Islamist terror attack in Mulhouse wouldn't have happened. We can have different points of view about the special relationship between our countries, but there's one thing we should be able to agree on: the safety of our citizens. At the moment, in our administrative retention centres, where we hold the people with the most dangerous profiles whom we want to deport, 43% are Algerian. And after 90 days, we just have to release them, because Algeria won't take them back.
De laissez-passer consulaire de l'Algérie.
The minister has now presented Algeria with a list of its nationals, mainly convicted criminals, who France wants to deport back to Algeria. He has warned Algeria that if it fails to comply, France will impose a series of measures, starting with the end of visa-free travel to France for Algerian dignitaries. He says France could also revoke the 1968 accord, which makes it easier for Algerians to come to France to visit or to live. In response, Algeria says it could look at the 61 real estate properties occupied by the French at rents that haven't been raised since 1962. Emmanuel Macron may talk about the French love for Algeria and Algerians, the origin of by far the largest group of immigrants in France today. In Algeria, there is still a lot of resentment dating back to a 130-year colonial occupation and a long and brutal independence war in which hundreds of thousands of Algerians were killed. A telling moment during the Olympic opening ceremony this summer, France celebrated its revolutionary history and its multiculturalism, while the Algerian delegation paused to throw roses into the Seine at the place where the bodies of Algerians were dumped after a 1961 police massacre. 62 years after the end of the Algerian War, the echoes of that conflict still rumble on, making it as hard as ever for France and Algeria to find common ground and a way out of a mutually damaging crisis. John Lawrenson, DW, Paris.
Do you have feedback that you'd like to share with us on that or any other story in the show? In that case, the address for emails is insideeurope@dw.com. You're listening to Inside Europe. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. Welcome back to Inside Europe. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. Coming up, the troubling case of Fabian Schmidt, the German green card holder detained in the US, the International Olympic Committee breaks 2 records at once, and a European Citizens' Assembly initiative takes us on a democratic odyssey.
I joined the Odyssey because I want to be a good ancestor, not for my grandchildren, but for the people who will live on the planet in 200 years.
Those stories and much more still to come. Now, I thought long and hard about how to introduce the following segment, and I've decided to go for directness. It's important to me right now that I make absolutely clear that I do not believe that anybody's value as a human being is in any way related to their passport. There are many people caught up in Donald Trump's immigration crackdown right now, and their fate is in no way less important than those of EU citizens, including 2 German tourists who have been detained by US immigration authorities in recent weeks. However, the EU cases are significant partly because of their political implications. Germany issued a travel advisory for the US last week, and partly because they represent an abrupt expansion of our understanding of just who exactly can become a target of US immigration enforcement. Of these incidents, the case of Fabian Schmidt, the 34-year-old German green card holder arrested at Logan Airport in Boston on March 7th and detained ever since, is particularly alarming for reasons which will soon become apparent. To find out more about what happened, I spoke to Sarah Betancourt, a Boston-based reporter for GBH News, who has been following the case from the beginning.
So he was visiting family in Germany and had come home through Luxembourg. And when he re-entered the United States through Logan Airport, he was stopped by Customs and Border Protection at the airport in Terminal E, which is our international section. And according to his family, he was held there on a Friday and a Saturday and interrogated. And his mother, who I interviewed, she said he was violently interrogated there. He was stripped naked, put in a cold shower by 2 officials, and then put back in a chair. He was put on a mat in a bright room with other people who were also there in the section of the airport with little food or water. She said he suffered from sleep deprivation and then was also denied access to his medication for anxiety and depression. And then finally, when he was re-interrogated, he collapsed and was taken to Massachusetts General Hospital, which we verified. He didn't know it at the time, but he had the flu, and she believes that a lot of what occurred that Friday during the interrogations really exacerbated his situation, and he suffered a medical emergency as a result.
That treatment, Sarah, is that typical for people who are detained by ICE?
It is not. So in the airport, the authority that has jurisdiction in that part of the airport is called Customs and Border Protection. It's actually not ICE, but this kind of treatment, which a lot of people have reached out to me and said, "Oh, this sounds a lot like torture," is not typical at all. And this was the first situation where a green card holder was detained by CBP, because we heard about the situation with Mahmoud Khalil a couple days later.
Right, I wanted to ask you about that because those 2 cases are happening in a very, very similar time span, both involving green card holders. In the case of Mahmoud Khalil, it's been made explicit that arrest was connected to his involvement in Palestinian solidarity organising on campus. But Schmidt's case is very different. He wasn't politically active in any way.
Well, that we know of, but it seems like at first ICE and CBP were not letting the family know what exactly the situation was on why Fabian Schmidt was detained. His family said to us, and through background checks, we could see that he is a green card holder in good standing. He had actually just renewed his green card last year, and if something was wrong, something would have been flagged, and he would not have been able to get that. So that's very similar to Khalil in that they were both green card holders in good standing. but it could potentially be in relation to Mr. Schmidt's history about 10 years ago. But his family assured GBH that, all of it was a DUI and a pot possession that was dismissed in California, that those had been taken care of years ago.
Sarah, you've got an immense amount of experience in the immigration beat. Does this feel different to you? Is there something new happening?
I mean, I think about what happened during the first Trump administration, where there were people who had legal permanent residency, had green cards, who were detained at Logan Airport. And in a couple instances, despite judges saying, this person can be in this country legally, we're going to put a temporary restraining order on the Trump administration deporting this person. The Trump administration deported those individuals anyway. This was back in 2017 and 2020. So this sort of rings familiar to me. But at the same time, it seems like a lot of this is happening faster in Trump's administration in his second term. I think we're seeing a lot more happening more quickly. He's definitely emboldened. Something I noticed in a lot of the executive orders related to immigration, when comparing them back to like 2017, 2018, they're written quite differently. It's sort of like he and a lot of his immigration advisors have sort of anticipated the fact that there's going to be legal repercussions for every executive order he puts through. And it's sort of like they've written these executive orders to have like a shield to make them easier to defend in court.
Sarah Betancourt, thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate you having me on.
Sarah Betancourt is a Boston-based reporter for GBH News. Now, to other things. The International Olympic Committee has elected its first ever female president. She's also their first ever African president, so that's 2 records smashed in one go. Is there a catch? Well, that kind of depends upon who you talk to, which is fine because we've got that covered. Our usually Madrid-based correspondent and consummate sports fan, Ashish Sharma, was in the conference centre in Athens when the election results were announced.
Dear friends and colleagues, the 144th IOC session has elected as the 10th president of the International Olympic Committee, Mrs. Kirsty Coventry.
The delirium of IOC members in the conference hall was met by an equal amount of surprise from the media waiting outside. It was the manner of a victory. It was expected that several rounds would come into play, with votes evenly divided before a winner emerged. But in just one round, Coventry gained 49 votes from a possible 97. Contest over. She was seen to have the unspoken support of Thomas Bach, the current president. At the Paris Olympics, Bach had described the profile of the person he wanted as his successor, and in the end it seemed that the IOC members had listened to their boss. Bach, though, was quick to deny this.
There is no preferred candidate I had in all this campaign. I have said what I had to say about the profile I see for my successor, because I felt obliged to tell this to the members who were expecting from me that I would be ready to extend my mandate.
But Juan Antonio Samaranch Jr., son of one of the longest-serving and best-known presidents, said the path had been clearly laid down by Bach.
When he announced he would not be a candidate, he made clear what he thought was the best profile for the next president of the IOC. He said Olympic champion, non-European, different generation. He said that publicly. We knew all the rest of the candidates, we knew what the field looked like, and the vote, as I said, confidential and secret vote of the members, have demonstrated that that view has resonated and got a significant majority of the vote.
The IOC members are eclectic, ranging from princes, sheikhs, politicians, business tycoons, and just good old-fashioned former athletes. As an Olympic gold medal winning swimmer, Kirsty Coventry falls into the latter, but she's also a politician. She's currently Zimbabwe's Minister of Sport. She's seen as a continuation candidate who likely follow Thomas Bach's strategy of good governance, sustainability and gender parity.
President Bach has led our organization extremely well over the last few years. Not always easy, as many of you know. There's been many difficulties that he's overcome. I would like to be able to have those conversations with him on, how he decided to tackle those and what advice he could give me for the future in terms of that.
But then what's wrong with that? There is this saying, if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. The Paris Games were the pinnacle of IOC achievement. Games that were sustainable, one of the most watched events in sporting history, gender balanced, and brought in revenues of over 7.6 billion euros. I assure you, this is... But stormy waters lie ahead, and the question rises as to how the new leader will cope with issues such as transgender athletes, and the question of what to do about Russian participation. And then there's Donald Trump, who will be hosting the 2028 Games in LA. He's already banned trans athletes from competing in women's categories, and his tough policies on immigration may even impact athletes and their supporters entering the country.
When it comes to the USA and LA, I have been dealing with, let's say, difficult men in high positions since I was 20 years old. My firm belief is that President Trump is a huge lover of sports. He will want these games to be significant. He will want them to be a success. And we will not waver from our values and our values of solidarity and ensuring every athlete that qualifies for the Olympic Games has the possibility to attend the Olympic Games and be safe.
Whatever the challenges ahead, Coventry is aware that her leadership represents an historic first. Coventry's mentor and an IOC member, Anita de France, says that she's seen enough in Coventry's character to know that the new IOC president won't be easily derailed from what she wants to achieve.
She was a minister of sport in a country. There were 6,000 staff. She had to reduce it to 3,000. And then she had to take the football federation aside because of the sexual harassment. And so she went from being the most popular minister to the least popular minister because they love football. But now it's a better organization because of what she had the courage to do.
There is a feeling, though, among some IOC members that the most experienced candidate, Sebastian Coe, was swept aside, being seen as a disruptor. Coe, as leader of World Athletics, has ruled against transgender athletes, banned Russia and Belarus from competing in his sport, and controversially introduced prize money at the Paris Games. While Coventry is seen as a safe pair of hands with a mantra of evolution, not revolution, Coe would likely have turned everything onto its head. Whether the IOC members have made the right choice, only time will tell. After all, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Ashish Sharma, DW, Costa Navarino.
I am very grateful to Greece, by the way, for having invented the Olympics. Not by any stretch of imagination Greece's only gift to the world. We owe democracy to them as well. And that being the case, it seems very appropriate that Athens should have been the launchpad for an ambitious crowdsourced project advocating for a permanent European People's Assembly basically by going ahead and creating one anyway. The idea is that the Assembly will comprise both in-person and online meetings with groups of people from across Europe selected by random lottery to engage in multilingual transnational deliberations in setting the future agenda. Begun in autumn 2024 and continuing throughout 2025, the Assembly will be travelling to different European cities, asking participants to put forward proposals for how the EU can better prepare for and respond to future crises. Zoe Bass reports.
Imagine, you may want to close your eyes or not, but imagine that you find yourself in a Greek port. We're in Greece. You are arriving on a ship, big ship, and you are told that you're going to go on this ship in a direction you don't really know what this direction is. Maybe you have to decide where the ship will go.
That was Calypso Nikolaidis welcoming participants to the first pilot assembly of the Democratic Odyssey in Athens. inspired by the ancient Greek tradition of direct democracy, it asked 200 European citizens to tackle the following question: how can we, the people, help steer the European ship through upcoming storms? It's been over 2,300 years since the last Citizens' Assembly took place on this plateau opposite the Parthenon in ancient Athens. This form of deliberative democracy is based on the idea that ordinary citizens can and should play a central role in finding solutions to some of society's toughest problems. Debate, theatre and music were all used to explore ideas and make connections. Building on the Conference on the Future of Europe, this crowd-funded initiative calls for radical political change. The goal, a permanent standing People's Assembly for Europe.
I joined the Odyssey because I want to be a good ancestor, not for my grandchildren, but for the people who will live on the planet in 200 years.
I joined the Democratic Odyssey because I'm very opinionated, and I want the EU to listen to citizens' opinions more, so I can speak more.
I don't know. The wind brought me.
I decided to join the Democratic Odyssey because Europe deserves better than short-term party political interests.
And I have joined the Democratic Odyssey because I find it so important to rejuvenate this old saga with young people of today, of the 21st century.
And so a People's Assembly for Europe is, at least in part, about trying to influence and shape the agenda of the next European Commission and European Union.
That was Nicolo Milanese, founder of European Alternatives, speaking at the opening of the Assembly in Athens. So how does one get involved in something like this? Candidates are selected by a process of sortition, using lottery draws, dice rolls, or by simply approaching people in person, on the street or in the park. I asked some of those who participated about their initial expectations.
Honestly, I have never participated in this kind of program before, and I was really curious about how it will be organized and what kind of people I would meet there.
Vicky lives in the Czech Republic, but is originally from Belarus, where she worked as a journalist. Emil, who is Finnish but now lives in Estonia, has previous experience with a smaller, locally based citizens' assembly.
Honestly, I was a bit skeptical at first, because doing something like this, something so widespread like this, and then trying to bring those suggestions and ideas to a practical level, it can be very difficult.
And this is Yama, whose enthusiasm is truly infectious.
I couldn't find any way of democracy that I could say I can fit in there. But when my teacher referred me to Democracy Odyssey, and I went to their website and I saw Public Assembly, that hit me so well. I said, yeah, this is how it should be, actually.
But Yama also shared his concerns about the future of democracy in Europe. Coming from Afghanistan to Greece in 2018, he is particularly sensitive to just how hard the path to democracy can be.
So this concerns me a lot because people are losing hope in democracy. And I grew up with this idea because my father was one of the first democratic politicians in Afghanistan. Our president then got hanged by the Taliban. So when I see we did so many sacrifices and we're going to lose it for nothing, it really makes me sad. We need to work for this. We need to give power to the people, for real.
For Emil, the discussions of past and future crises highlighted the differences in perspective of Eastern and Western Europe.
At the assembly, we were talking about the crises, and I think it became more clear that people, the ones who live in Athens or Greece, or then in the western part of Europe, they don't see the war in Ukraine in the same way that the eastern part does.
So what should the citizens of Europe do to help steer this great continent through future storms?
And I do believe that
the main way people can help steer the European ship through upcoming storms is by realizing that the ship is not European. Because this assembly that I experienced in Athens was not European. There were so many communities from different backgrounds and different starting points. And despite the gap, they figured out ways to talk to each other, to connect to some degree.
That was Nikki from Nigeria, born in Greece. And Anthi, a law student from Athens, drew on the wisdom of an ancient Greek philosopher for inspiration.
Aristotle said that all of us, even if we are not experts politicians, we have something tiny little thing to offer to make democracy works better. So I think the solution is to stay connected and share our opinions and our concerns about the future of democracy, because that's the whole point of the democracy. All the voices must be heard.
And that's the point. The ideas and recommendations of these citizens will need to be taken seriously by those in power if real change is to follow. Yet former Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou, speaking at the Athens Assembly, is hopeful.
It will be a fight because not everybody will like this. Some people don't want power to the people. I will be with you. I will be supporting, because I am now in the Council of Europe. It's 46 countries. We already just made a report on participative democracy and actually mentioned the Democratic Odyssey and what you are doing here. So I think we will slowly be able to reach a more permanent citizens' assembly for all of Europe.
It is difficult to foresee how this particular Odyssey will end. But the hope and enthusiasm of all of those to whom I spoke for this report was undeniable. All told me they will continue to participate, either via the online assemblies or in person. This is Zoe Bass for DW in Europe.
European Standing Army or European People's Standing Assembly. I wonder which of those two concepts would make Europeans feel more safe. I don't have any data, but I would be very interested in the answer. Our quiz of the week is democracy themed, so head on over to Spotify to take part. Congratulations, by the way, to everyone last week who knew that the first ever St. Patrick's Day parade was held not in Dublin, Ireland, but in Boston, USA. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. You're listening to Inside Europe.
Hey everybody, I'm Kai Risdal, the host of Marketplace, your daily download on the economy. Money influences so much of what we do and how we live. That's why it's essential to understand how this economy works. At Marketplace, we break down everything from inflation and student loans to the future of AI so that you can understand what it all means for you. Marketplace is your secret weapon for understanding this economy. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Staying with the democracy theme for a moment, in ancient Greece, bear with me, the central town square, or the agora, was the central part of civic life. It was where citizens met, mingled and debated, which kind of tells you how important town squares are to civic life and to democracy. And also why I was so excited when reporter Rob Cameron the other week got in touch with the tale of an old district in the Czech city of Brno called, not very imaginatively, Stare Brno or Old Brno, which had recently acquired a town square for the very first time. Here's Rob's report.
The bells of the Basilica of the Assumption of Our Lady ringing out across what can now safely be called Mendel Square in the district of Stare Brno, the oldest in the Moravian metropolis. The oldest maybe, but by far not the prettiest or best preserved. On one side is the Augustinian Abbey of St. Thomas's, where the father of genetics, the abbot Gregor Mendel, carried out his famous experiments on pea plants in the monastery garden and prayed in the same basilica. But the remaining three sides are a jarring leap into modernity. Here, a row of 1960s high-rise apartment blocks. There, a supermarket, a chemist, a florist. And until recently, the middle of the square was nothing but a nexus of tram lines, bus and trolleybus stops, and a busy road. Until now, that is.
So my name is Ondřej Chybík. I'm an architect. I'm the co-founder of Chybík and Christoph architecture practice based here in Brno. But we have branches in Prague, Bratislava, and also a little satellite in London.
Brno native Ondřej Chybík and his colleagues have transformed Mendel Square into somewhere you want to stop and idle for a while, rather than just pass through.
In this neighborhood there was never a proper square, as we understand from our urban designer lexicon. Our aspiration was to transform this space to something very publicly attractive, very flexible, and also something very central, because the original purpose of this space was purely a transportation hub. It used to be a place where the citizens of Brno changed from the trams to the buses, from buses to trolley buses. There used to be lots of barriers in terms of railings, in terms of grass areas without any significant quality. So our aspiration in this space was to create a very flexible urban surface, free of any barrier, and also to make this space more pleasant.
And more pleasant it is. Ondřej and I sat in a pop-up cafe on the square, struggling sometimes to be heard over groups of teenagers and mothers with babies in prams. The cafe does a fine line in fancy coffees and pastries, including the Portuguese national dessert, pastel de nata. The grass that nobody set foot on is gone. In its place, pale grey cobblestones dotted with red metal benches, a nod to the colours of Brno that you slowly realise you see everywhere. The trams, buses and trolleybuses are all red and white. They still snake their way through the square, and it's still a vital transport hub. But Ondřej explained he really wants this place to be more than that.
50% of the activities here are related to the transportation, but the second and previously completely missing feature of the space was to accommodate these other urban activities, as to rest, to have a coffee, to observe the urban life, to be able to have an exhibition on the square, on the free space, as we can see right now, to have a Christmas market during the Christmas, to have maybe even demonstration to raise the civic voice. And all the second half of urban activities was impossible to have here. So I'm very grateful that we got this happen.
And ultimately, Ondřej Chybík hopes Mendel Square will help raise the profile of Gregor Mendel, the Augustinian abbot whose pioneering work on genes we're still building on today. A man who helped, along with the Bren gun and the late Brno author Milan Kundera, put the Moravian capital on the map. Rob Cameron, DW, Brno.
And that is it for today. This programme was produced by me, Kate Laycock, with help from Charlie Shield, Lavinia Pitu and Natalie Muller. Our sound engineer was Gerd Georgi.